In the summer of 1971, Richard Nixon walked onto live television and told the world that the dollar was no longer backed by gold. Every economist expected a global financial meltdown. Instead, the world shrugged and kept using dollars anyway. That moment is the key to understanding why one country's currency became everyone's money, and what actually happens if that changes. To understand how Nixon could do something that audacious and get away with it, you have to go back to 1944. World War II is still happening, but the smart people in suits can already see it's winding down. They know that when the shooting stops, every country is going to need to start trading with each other again. And trading is nearly impossible when every country has a different currency and nobody trusts anybody else's money. So 44 countries send representatives to a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and they hammer out a deal. Here's the deal. The US dollar will be tied to gold. 1 ounce of gold equals $35, fixed, guaranteed. Every other country's currency will then be tied to the dollar. Gold on top, dollar in the middle, everyone else at the bottom. The reason the dollar got that job is simple and almost uncomfortable to say out loud. At the time, the United States held more than half of the world's gold supply. America also had factories, ships, and farmland that survived the war completely untouched, while Europe was essentially rubble. The dollar was the most trustworthy thing on the table. There was nothing close. Once the dollar becomes the anchor, countries start needing dollars to do any international business at all. Japan buying oil from Saudi Arabia? Dollar. Brazil buying equipment from Germany? Dollar. The dollar becomes the universal translator for global trade. Economists call this reserve currency status. Other countries hold it in reserve because they need it constantly, like oxygen for the global economy. But that was just the beginning. Back to 1971. By then, the system had a fatal crack. The US had been spending massively on the Vietnam War and domestic programs, printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. France, suspicious, started demanding physical gold in exchange for its dollar reserves. Other countries followed. The gold was draining out. Nixon had two choices: deflate the American economy painfully or cut the rope. He cut the rope. On August 15th, he announced that the dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. Just like that, the bedrock of the global financial system was gone. And yet the world kept using dollars. Here is why. Within a few years, the US had made agreements with Saudi Arabia and the rest of OPEC so that oil, the single most important commodity on earth, could only be bought and sold in dollars. If your country needs oil, and every country needs oil, you need dollars first. That one arrangement chained the entire world to the dollar more completely than gold ever had. The dollar wasn't backed by a metal anymore. It was backed by energy itself. So what does America actually get from all this? A staggering amount. When the whole world wants your currency, you can borrow money at incredibly low rates because everyone is lining up to lend to you. You can run enormous trade deficits, importing far more than you export, and it barely matters because the world is happy to absorb your dollars in exchange for real goods. Economists have a name for it: the exorbitant privilege. America prints the money the whole world needs to function. That is, by any measure, the most powerful financial position any country has ever held in history. Now here's the question that keeps policymakers up at night. What happens if it stops? Some countries, particularly China and Russia, have been actively trying to trade in their own currencies to chip away at dollar dependence. China has built something called the petro-yuan, a direct attempt to price oil in Chinese currency. The dollar's share of global reserves has been quietly, steadily shrinking for decades. The cracks are real, but replacing the dollar is not like switching to a new phone. You need a currency that billions of people trust without hesitation. You need a massive, liquid financial market where that currency can be traded freely at any hour on any day. And you need a government with a legal system that people genuinely believe will not change the rules overnight for political reasons. Right now, nothing else checks all three boxes. The euro comes close, but the European Union is a coalition of different countries with different interests that sometimes pull in opposite directions. China's yuan is tightly controlled by Beijing, and that government control is precisely what makes the rest of the world nervous about holding it. So the most likely future is not a dramatic overnight collapse. No single morning where the dollar just stops working. It is a slow, grinding erosion. The dollar stays king but rules a slightly smaller kingdom, while a handful of other currencies slowly carve away at its edges over decades. Which brings us back to that television moment in 1971 when Nixon severed the dollar from gold and the world kept moving anyway. The dollar's real foundation was never the gold sitting in Fort Knox. It was the sheer weight of habit, infrastructure, and the absence of anything better. That foundation is still standing. It is just no longer quite as unshakable as it once seemed.